Well, good evening. Happy Monday night. I'm Aaron here in Pensacola, Florida, here in the Bowtie Treasure Studio. How are you doing tonight? If you don't mind, let us know where you're watching from. We're going to be having a lot of fun on this project behind me. It's an antique armoire, and I want to feature Dixie Belle's Terra Clay Paint on this project. I think it'll be a great time to get creative, discover some fun ways to layer some Terra paint. If you've not used it yet, you definitely want to get your hands on some here in the near future, especially like if you like layers, more artistic finishes, and just letting some paint drip or flow on your projects. Or if you even want to blend, it's very forgiving. It's a lovely paint to try, and I encourage you to do that. Let me just, before we go too far, show you the before pictures of this project. It was just an old, worn down armoire. I took the glass out. I like to do that when possible. And then I did a good coat of Boss, gray Boss, and that always puts it in a good foundational place for me. It really takes care of it and gets a nice base coat for my project. So that's what we've done so far on this piece. Tonight I'm going to be featuring Prairie Dawn, Moonbeam, and then I have Desert Tan. I also am I have out Wheat and Blue Agave. Those are the other two colors that I have on my workstation here, so those are going to be great. How about let's paint? All right, you ready to go? About 2 or 3 months ago, when Terra first came out, I did paint a small buffet cabinet to my YouTube channel, and I featured that project there as well. I just searched for Terra in my channel, and you'll find that. We did a really nice kind of coastal boho, drippy Terra paint finish. So if you'd like a little bit more insight on that, you can check that out. I'm going to use some of those same techniques tonight. And one of the brushes that I barely got to use on that live was the Big Daddy brush. And tonight, I think this canvas of a project definitely is worthy of a larger brush. And we'll probably also feature Dixie Belle's premium chip brushes too. And who knows what else we'll pull out. I think those work really well when you're doing washes and working in the Terra line. I do like to use Dixie Belle's Mini as well. I do like the nice firm bristle brush when I'm using the Terra line because the paint's a little drier and thicker to paint on. And so if you really want something more aggressive, you might try the synthetic brushes too. It just really depends on the size of the project you're working on. All right, last time I also worked with the Terra line, just to be, when I try to use the descriptive term of artistic finish, and I used a little butcher plant pan like this. If not, you could probably try something like a porcelain plate. I wouldn't do paper or something. You need to kind of be able to swish it around. I like the butcher pan because you can put a lot of water in here and really not make too much of a mess. So that's a great product. You can find those on Amazon or other art stores. And I think I use them for watercolor painting too. So they're really a great, easy to clean. Terra paint is so easy to clean. And so I would recommend to get something like that if you like artistic finishes too. Okay, so 3 colors. This, just to remind you again, this has been cleaned with White Lightning. I did 1 coat of gray Boss. And then after that, I painted, this is Desert Tan. And just a quick tip, if you've not used Dixie Belle's clay paint, one of the things you'll find, and I'm going to pull the camera down here, is the colors seem darker. But notice around the rim how it's much lighter. This is the color or the tone that you're going to get when you top coat or wax it. So you see how it's darker? So basically when you see this cabinet behind me, this armoire, it looks almost like drop cloth and chalk mineral paint. But once this gets wet, it's going to darken up. So whenever you're looking at the Terra Clay Paint line, you're kind of looking for the color on the inside, or what does it look like wet. And that's another reason why a lot of times the color that's on the front is darker than when you paint it, just because it's kind of simulating what that looks like when you do your top coating or you get it wet. So that's definitely something I want you to keep in mind. And in order to do what that does is it really helps color harmony and brings out the colors really well. So that was Desert Tan. This is Prairie Dawn, and I really am, for the most part, somewhat making this finish up. It's The trickiest part, or I might say the adventurous part of clay paint, is that you're painting with the concept if you know where you're headed, and then you get to top coat it and it all just looks so amazing. So you almost have, maybe we would call it a leap of faith. How about that? As opposed to chalk mineral paint, when you put the color on, you're pretty much getting what you put on, unless you put some other altering colors on there. With Terra, you have the dry version of what it looks like, and then you have the top coated / waxed version. So this gives me some room to mix, move around, get wet, and that's one reason again that I like this. And so approaching it this way does give you more of an artistic feel, because you kind of have an artistic palette to work with. So that's really where we're headed. And I think for the sake of our project tonight, I'm going to work on the sides and maybe the top. Terra does take a little longer to dry. So in other words, from it going from wet to all the way dry does take a little longer. And I really don't want to drag you through a lot of heat gun work. But if we need to, maybe on the top, we will. So I'm going to focus on the two sides, not so much on the fronts. And I think that'll help us kind of be creative and work a little quicker overall. I want to keep fairly wet, and that would allow me to work with the layers quicker. When you go to paint Terra paint, you'll notice that it's a lot thicker of a paint. So when you go to apply it, it's almost like your chalk mineral paint is dried out. Just remember that's the way it's supposed to be, because it's clay paint. It's more earth-based. So let me pull you up here. One of the things I'm going to keep nearby, in fact, I'll probably even put in my pocket, is the mister bottle. So if I miss this, you'll see what I'm talking about. You see how it's getting darker? The mister bottle also helps reactivate that clay paint. If you try to reactivate chalk mineral paint, it's pretty much going to laugh at you. It's not really going to reactivate like this is. So one of the things we can do then is we can just free flow this. I don't want this to be super refined, okay? I want this to feel layered, almost like over time. So you can, one of my favorite things to do too is to also have a rag. I like to dab a lot. So here's where I put it on one time. I'm gonna remist it. Like I said, it needs a lot more water than chalk mineral paint. And then you just decide how loose and how wet you want it to be. Okay, now keep in mind, the other thing you want to think about is, do you want to cover up all the work you did, or do you want to leave it showing through? So you put on as much as you want. And this is where I'm literally just making this up as we go. I think it'd be cool to maybe bring in the Big Daddy brush. I'm not really worried about, I'm almost treating it like a wash right now. Not really worried about where that's headed. I just want to move the paint. So a bigger squirt bottle, larger mist, a larger squirt of water. I think that would work well. So some other things you could try, if you want texture, you can do a larger brush. You can dab with your brush. You can do that. I'm just showing you how you can use the different colors. The other thing I just mentioned, you could also do, this is a wet rag so I got wet and it ran out the water. You can dab. I love to do that. I've demonstrated that several times on the Dixie Belle channel here, so that's another way. A dry one might be okay. It just depends on the texture that you want. Just, you determine how you want to use that. I like having that feel. So I'm going to stick with a larger squirt bottle because I want to move the paint a little bit more. And we're going to let that just do its thing up the top. Drip. Give me a second as they work on the bottom, and I'll adjust my camera. If it's too much texture, you might try less paint, and you could do even something like, you can go with the best dang brush and you can swirl it around if you want and go with more of a cloudy effect. That's a way too. And I'm sure you've seen other artists do that. Let me just mess that up because I want a little bit more texture on this. Keep in mind too, I can paint this tonight and then tomorrow I can come back and do it again and add yet another layer on here. We are just winging it tonight. Looking for my next color. So this next color is going to be, where did I put all those colors? Prairie Dawn. And this is the more, I'm gonna come down here because my lights. Prairie Dawn is more of a yellowish color. And we're just working our way down the piece. Hi Joy, good to see you. So I'm using the premium chip brush. I'm telling you, this clay paint really wants to be dry, but I really love the fact that I can play with it. You are, to a certain degree, reactivating some of the color underneath. So be as playful or as cautious as you like. That was loud. Remember, we used the Big Daddy. Let's go back to the Big Daddy. And don't ask what I'm doing. I'm just kidding. I really am exploring, working with textures and layers. Now I'm starting to actually work the previous colors together. This is where I would say we are layering and we are exploring, because it's about the only way that you're going to find new finishes and techniques. It's not for, I will guarantee you, it is not for every piece, because not every piece is, let's say, in a rugged or has a large space for you to do this to. So if you want to be more cautious, try it on smaller projects. You see how I'm dragging the brush? And it's very possible that when it's all said and done, I'm going to accentuate the dragging even more. Hopefully my sound is still working. Okay, so now I'm back to the misting brush. I like the misting a little bit more. It's giving me a more even coat of water. And I'm going to switch to my last brush. This, we're kind of getting back to our original color. Now I only used one coat of paint, so if you want 2 solid coats of paint, you're going to need a second coat in some places. I like having a little bit of the boss showing through. I'm quite all right with that. It continues my layer. So now I'm just kind of experimenting with texture and putting a second coat in some places. Not a full coat everywhere, just some places. In case you wondered if I've done any other pieces with Terra, on my YouTube channel you'll see that I've also done blending with Terra on a china cabinet. That was a fun project. I believe it's also featured on Dixie Belle, or will be on Dixie Belle's Dixie Belle TV, so if you haven't checked that out. So some other creative options for this is you can even come back with a stencil. That'd be kind of fun. Now this is the part where we were talking about earlier, how you almost have to have a leap of faith and trust the process of what's going to happen, either with the dripping and also with the drying. Do you remember that we started at the top with the lightest of all the colors, and then down below is the darkest? So what we've created is this almost textured ombre feel. And I'm looking for just some places. What I don't want is a very smooth brush stroke. I want more texture. And you can touch the top or wherever just to see how it's drying. The top is actually already starting to dry, which is pretty cool, because I want to continue to talk about. I'm going to bring up my tripod. If you give me just a second, I want to get up there because that's where we're going to be working next. You can imagine how it'll be fun to work on the other side of this piece, because I'm not going to be able to 100% duplicate this whole look. So you can imagine that on the other side, it's going to have the same feel, but it might be a little bit. Once you look at, so you can see here I'm patting texture on. I want this to feel very organic, and this is where I can come back with my rag and soften that down. Nobody's going to go, look at all those brush strokes. They're just going to feel like texture. So these are just different ways. I like to use the word faux finish too. It's another thing that we're doing, is creating aged. And some of these things you're just going to have to, I'm almost using more of a dry brush technique right now. This is another way of going about it. And we're just experimenting. It's so easy to experiment. Sometimes you just don't know what you want to do until you try it. And I like the fact that Terra Clay Paint gives me that option to experiment. Not that the other ones don't, okay, don't get me wrong. So I'm doing more dry brush right now, but the water will reactivate that and give it some more life. But try to be consistent with the technique from a standpoint of, you're going to dry brush the right side, dry brush the left side before you bring in the color. You know, see how I'm hitting the top too? Don't forget about the top. Have y'all used Terra? I'm guessing Dixie Belle's probably asked, because it's a great question. See how many of you experimented with it. Because the paint, if you don't wet it down, it's just going to suck up all the paint right away. And I don't necessarily want that to happen. But if you get it too wet, you're going to be wet. It's going to be like watercolor. So be careful. There's a balance. And that's where you need to experiment and practice with your paints. So between dragging and stippling, that misting's not going to last a long time. So right now we're just blocking in the color. This is where I say to you can be my class, and I say, okay class, what did I do next? This is how you find out if you're really teaching, right? If your class can recite step number 2. First of all, we put the color down. I know at one point we brought in the Big Daddy. You have to use as much of the same process. If not, your two sides just are not going to work out. So let's go ahead and bring in some of the Big Daddy. Light drag, heavy drag. Just make sure you're using that, because that was part of your creative. You've been dabbing it. A little bit of extra water, give it some texture. Don't forget water, dabbing. rags, texture, all the things. So this is the next color, Prairie Dawn. The one thing I do like, I mentioned a while ago that Terra does take a little longer to dry. And when I say that, it takes longer to dry when you're painting it really thick. But if you're painting in washes, it doesn't take as long. So here's the Big Daddy again, just kind of moving the paint down. Just dropping my handle in my paint. True creativity. Gonna have to put that over to the side. So come in here, get that texture back in there. And then, you know, if you want to, grab the rag again. And you're just disguising, stippling, running. That's okay. It's all gonna get you there. It's amazing that when you don't mist at first how dry it is. But see how it's, trying to describe right now, how it's just smooth. The water breaks a lot of that up. We're just gonna use a little bit more of this just to kind of get us down there. Because if not, it's just going to be the same color all the way down, and I want to slowly transition. So this is really more dry brush right here, and I'm mixing it up. What I mean mixing it up, some dabbing, and I might even go in there and grab some of that of the original color, which is Desert Tan, and cover up what I just did. Just so it's not so predictable. I do want the bottom to be more just Desert Tan. You see I'm using the water. This is gonna make it start to move. Come back in there, maybe move some paint with the. And anytime that you don't have a lot of paint on your brush, you're almost just dry brushing, or just, I like to use the word dusting. So I'm basically just dusting. And I'm gonna grab my rag, because I have too much smoothness right here. I wanna add a little bit of texture. Make it random, so it's not so heavy on brush, blended brush. And then use your bottle anywhere that you want to encourage a little bit more dripping or texture. That water is going to add texture to your piece too. So the light at the top, that's the lightest of the three colors, and then start toning it down, and at the bottom it's mainly just Desert Tan. So I'm going to come back in there with the Desert Tan, because as I mentioned before, I don't want it all to be only one coat of Desert Tan. I do want some of the original color, or the base color, to be 100%. And so I'm kind of going over that a little bit more. And at times you can add some texture. Yeah, the water is really running, and I'm kind of dabbing over the runs, kind of creating a cool effect there too. Just be careful, if you brush over this, it's just gonna be blended. More water, more runs. You decide how you want it to go. And I think that'll work out. I shouldn't go too crazy, but if it does. So tonight is layer one, and then you let it dry and decide how much more creativity should we add to it. Lightest color. And this is where I want to get a little bit more dry brushed without the paint underneath being super wet. I tell you what, let's change that. This is all about spontaneity tonight. I'm going to go in there with a craft brush. I'm going to go in there with tell you what I'd like to do. So I'm going to go back in there with the desert tan because almost all this is lighter now. I'm just going to go back in there and just dab into the dark areas a little bit more of this desert tan because I don't want the light colors in the crevices. I want this, what do we call this thing? Fleur-de-lis. I want this to be a little bit more. So you see how I'm dabbing? I don't want that to be refined. Let me bring you back in there. You can see how it's kind of coming together with the dabbing. So that's the original color. And I do expect it to dry. Then I'm going to come back in there with a second color, which is the Prairie Dawn. And I'm going to dab over that. So it's still, again, about layers. I don't want to remove all of what I just did. I'm just kind of dabbingly fading. And then you can just work it around. Don't get, the key here is I'm not trying to get too refined. All right. This is back to Moonbeam. Texture. This is going on very dry. Notice I'm not misting at all. Dragging that dry paint. Because I want this to feel a lot like the other side, but almost a little drier. If you need to, come back in there with this, I've only got 3 colors right now. The dark color, it's so dry. There we go. And just put some back into the crevices if you need to, if that's what your goal is. Remembering this is gonna pop out later on. You see how I'm popping that out? I'm very messy and on purpose because I don't want this to be refined. As much as this piece has the decorative elements to be refined, it's in a little bit of rough shape and I'm owning it. I want this to feel old world. So that's a little sloppy, but that's okay. Now you can come back and do a little bit of dabbing. I'll tell you what, let's do. I love the texture. You see how I'm just dabbing? I'm dabbing mostly on the raised surface, not in the crevices where I just put that color. Get that texture in there. If you really wanted to, you can even come in here with sea spray if you wanted to. But I'm letting the brush be my texture right now. I wish I had 2 cameras so you can see me going into my palette. Here we go. I like to use the word that I'm working on. So let's bring some more texture here. It is heavily textured. I'm not really spraying right now. Dragging. And that's cool. So I'm overlaying a lot of those smooth brush strokes we had earlier. You see how I'm going different directions? Because I want it to be random. And I'm hitting edges. You can sand this. It's sanding sandpaper. Now, if you've never sanded chalk mineral paint, this is clay paint, so you're going to get dust. So my recommendation is try a light grade grit sandpaper and then go from there. See how it goes. So if you like the top and all the textures that you get, and then you go down here where there's none and it's plain, do you like where you're headed versus where you were? Right now, it's headed towards a custom, hand-painted, artistic, old world feel. What do y'all think? Let me know in the comments. If you have any questions, I'd definitely love to hear those. And I always enjoy being here in the studio. Tonight was a little bit more unorthodox and more artistic and creative, and get you some products that you can be creative with. Good brushes, cheap brushes, get you some paint that you can just put on a piece, and don't be so methodical and precise that you can't be original and spontaneous and come up with something that you've not done before. There are a lot of these techniques I've done before. but in different ways and different products. It's very fulfilling to try that, so I'm glad I could do that with you tonight. All right, I think that's our time. Wow, I can't believe how fast that went. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Aaron here in the Bowtie Treasure Studio in Pensacola, Florida. Until next time, be creative, do something awesome. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
That's the end of the show. Make sure you subscribe and ring the bell before you go. Bye.